Xbox is about to make a billion-dollar gamble with Call of Duty, or is it? Call of Duty, arguably probably the largest franchise now under the Xbox umbrella, is about to make a billion-dollar gamble. As we will learn here on June 9th, there's an Xbox showcase coming up where there's going to be a whole bunch of games, but the focus of the deep dive, much like Starfield was after the June 9th event, is going to be Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which is making waves because it is the next massive blockbuster that we know of, I should say, launching this fall coming from Xbox. Yes, there's other launches that will happen, but none of them will be even close to the same scale that Black Ops will be when it does arrive, probably in the October or November timeframe, which is typically when these sort of things launch. Now, the big news and the big question that's been floating around, which seems to be relatively well answered at this point, is, hey, it is going to be coming to Game Pass on day one, which is a really big deal for a title that makes upward of $1 billion on launch weekend. To put this into Microsoft's premier, if you will, games as a service platform, the Game Pass as we know it, that's a really big deal. That's a big business risk, because if they just sold it outright, they already knew they would make literally hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in the first roughly week to 10 days. And when you're Xbox and you're trying to, build a business, making this sort of a jump, if you will, is a very big deal. It's a very heavy decision that Microsoft is now, it looks like they've aligned on and are going to be going down this path. So the question becomes, Brad, why do you keep saying this is $1 billion weekend? What is going on? Because Activision has literally told us that they make about $1 billion during launch. Now, for much of this video, I'm comparing it to Modern Warfare 2 because that seemed to be the sort of cleanest data that we had. And I will fully admit the data isn't perfect here. But it gives us it gives us a little slice of information about how much risk Microsoft is willing to take here to put this into Game Pass. And I got to tell you, after doing some, again, rough math, which we'll walk through here in a second, it's not as big of a risk as it actually kind of sort of seems. So let's just kind of dig into here first. So the first thing up is we actually know the exact amount of copies that were roughly sold, or not roughly, but that were sold on PlayStation during that first week. And it gets a little muddy, but this is by far the cleanest data that says, hey, look, 4.4 million copies were sold on PlayStation for Modern Warfare 2, and that data comes directly from the FTC versus Microsoft. So there's no real questioning that 4.4 million figure, because clearly that is accurate data. Now, how much of the $1 billion pie, which we'll use a nice round number here, does the 4.4 million sales on PlayStation represent? Roughly speaking, on the low end, it would be 30%. That would be if everybody bought just the basic SKU of Call of Duty, the current whatever version. Back then, they were doing these split SKUs. I think it was $69, so $70. And then there were higher end SKUs, I think over $100 or up to $100 that got you some in-game stuff. But if we just use the lowest cost version, then it's going to be about 30%. But realistically, you wouldn't be, I think it'd be safe to say 35%. And then if you're stretching, maybe 40% of the overall sales were representative on the PlayStation platform, which is a good thing to understand. The reason being is that, hey, if there's 300 million to 400 million on PlayStation, that means there's 600 to 700 million happening, elsewhere. And where else could they be? Well, let's see. Obviously, they are going to be on PC. They're going to be on Xbox, and there's probably some other revenue potentially tied in there. We don't fully have the complete breakdown. But it does give us, this figure helps us cement that 600 to 700 million is happening across PC and Xbox. And so when I try to look and find out how much was broken apart between PC and Xbox, and there's no real clear data. You can kind of do some things off of active player base, but we didn't get a clean slice. However, we do know that PlayStation is roughly 2-to-1 sales volume. I know it's changed a little bit with this latest generation, but you got to remember this title was also available on last generation consoles. So I don't think it's unfair to to say that the Xbox sales are likely half if they sold at the same volume as PlayStation. So if you do that math, so if there's 300 there, that means there's roughly 150, we'll just say 200 million on Xbox. 200-ish million is probably not an unreasonable number to make that inference, right? Which means there's roughly 400 to 500 million, roughly speaking, on PC. If there's only 200, I put only 200 million, as if that's not some massive number, we can kind of break out how many consoles or how many Game Pass signups have to actually occur to make this make sense for Microsoft. Because 200 million, while it is a lot, if you break that down, and now keep in mind, there's no way they're dropping Black Ops 6 into core. It's definitely going to be an Ultimate, so anybody who wants to play it on day one with Game Pass is going to have to be paying $17 dues a month. I think that is a very fair and reasonable assumption, which means to recoup that 200-ish million, Microsoft needs 11.7 million signups on day one to recover that same 200 million. Now, considering that there's only, I think, there's 34 million signups to get over a third of that in a single day or for a single game would be astronomically high. That would be a huge, and I mean huge, surge for Microsoft, and obviously they would love that sort of thing. But I wouldn't get too caught up in them actually doing that, because you're like, Brad, how are they ever going to do that? Well, think of it this way. If somebody pays for that first month, they're likely going to pay for that second month. And so for every additional month that somebody stays in Game Pass, that number actually cuts in half. So if they got roughly 5.5 million in that first month, then, that number doesn't seem all that stretched. And if you would say, hey, well, they might actually pay for 3 months if you could justify that rationale when you're trying to make this decision, which, I don't think is unreasonable given the Game Pass situation, or the Game Pass, the Season Pass or Battle Pass that Call of Duty does, which is very well done and very consistent, and a lot of content drops for this stuff, and I expect Black Ops 6 to be no different. Then you can cut that number in half into a third again, which gets you down in that 2 to 3 million range in that first month. And then it's like, oh, that's not such as big of a risk as you start to think about it. And so I think that's sort of the math that Microsoft is doing here when they're saying look, we'll put this in Game Pass because we think it makes sense. If we can get that person to sign up, and again, Microsoft has the data here. They know that if somebody pays for Game Pass for 1 month, they know the exact percentage of likelihood they will pay for a second, a third, and up to a year. And so they know that if they can get people in Game Pass, they will more than likely recover that cost. But it might take 2 months and 3 months. But again, then by the time the 4th month rolls around, they are ahead. So that is sort of, it was kind of hard for me to justify, or not justify, but really, really think about how Microsoft is going to do this, because, hey, they got to go to their investors and say look, this makes sense. But when you realize that 75% of the revenue, roughly speaking, is coming from outside of Xbox, it's a much smaller risk, but a much higher reward for Xbox. And I think that is how they have come to this justification, which is, I enjoy trying to figure these things out. Again, I want to be real clear that these numbers are rough. And they're just for representative purposes. The only number we know for a fact is 1 billion, and the only other number we know for a fact is 4.4 million on PlayStation. So everything else has to fall sort of in a hedged or speculative view. But I don't think it's too far off from reality at the end of the day. And again, Microsoft trying to make these decisions, just trying to add some color about how they probably came to the decision to put this into Game Pass on day one, which is why I believe that this is happening and will continue to happen going forward. Now, the one variable in here that I did not include, and there's actually two, I guess we didn't talk about too much here. The first one is any of the 34 million people who are already signed up who get Call of Duty, they are wiped out. They're no longer in there. You could potentially make the argument they may have churned otherwise, or churned or deactivated their subscription. So those people won't be new signups. So they're out of it too. We also don't know how the PC Game Pass signups are going to impact this as well. So these are two things that are going to muddy up the waters of the data streams, if you will, just a little bit. So keep that in mind. I think there's a non-zero chance that the PC subscriptions will likely go up too, if there's enough content on that side of the coin to help make Black Ops 6 worthwhile paying effectively the monthly fee at the end of the day. So there you go. That's just some back of the napkin math as Xbox starts to bring this to fruition. We're only 2 weeks away ish from learning more about Black Ops 6 and everything that it will include. I will point out that compared to like a Modern Warfare 2. Modern Warfare 3 maybe a little bit. Modern Warfare 2 was highly anticipated, and I think is potentially a little bit higher on the pecking order than Black Ops 6 from people wanting to go out and buy it again. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. There's a lot of variables in play, but either way, hopefully that gives a little bit of insight maybe into how Xbox is thinking about this. And as always, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.